should be. All right, welcome. This is Crash Canon. I'm Chris, and I've got a very special guest today. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Kennedy Hall.
And for those that don't know who you are, which is probably not many who are on my podcast, but what do you do?
I'm an author primarily, and I also have a podcast called Mere Tradition, which is on YouTube and then Substack, including all the various audio podcast platforms.
Yeah, I think there's only two Substacks I follow. It's yours and Dr. Kwasniewski's.
Oh,
I think that's
yes.
it.
He's awesome.
I think that's the only two I follow on Substack. So there you go. How did you get into I don't know if you call it apologetics. I'm not sure if that's what you would call what you do or not. But how did you get started with your career in kind of traditional Catholicism, writing books, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I was a high school teacher, and I always wanted to be an author. But the career of being a teacher, I thought it would just be something perhaps complementary and be something I did on the side. And maybe by the time I retired or something like that, I might write a few books, over 30 years or something. And basically, I realized I had to change careers for a variety of reasons. Partly because, at least where I live, it's just impossible to work in a Catholic school. It's not.
I was actually really curious about that because the Canadian Catholic school system is very different from the American Catholic school system.
Well, yeah, and there are different ones in different provinces. So I'm in the province of Ontario, and it's publicly funded. Right. And Canada, well, not just Quebec, but I thought 35% of this province is actually Catholics. So it's a pretty high population. So historically, there's a Catholic school system.
Right.
It is part of the founding document, basically, of the Dominion of Canada that Catholic education would be afforded funding by the government if the people desired it, basically. So there are a couple provinces that remain. Quebec is not one of them because they went so anti-clerical. But Ontario has it, and I believe Alberta does, funded by the state. So anyway, but basically at this point, they're just public schools with crosses on the doors. And so I was in one, and I don't have the ability to keep my mouth shut. And I was teaching religion, which meant I was actually teaching Catholicism. So it was a disaster. It was good for the students. It was good for me in the moment, but it was a lot of pressure and a lot of basically cancellation type stuff. And I just got tired of it. So I moved on, and then basically had to do something else and thought, okay, I'll publish a book. Terror of Demons kind of went weirdly viral. I didn't expect that. It was self-published, gave me some breathing room. And then I started finding work with the Fatima Center, Life Site, and then basically at a certain point went on my own, and that's where I am today.
Yeah, and wasn't some of your inspiration for whether you call it Family Be Damned or Lockdown with the Devil kind of your situation with teaching in the Canadian school system?
Yeah, I wrote a fiction called Lockdown with the Devil, and it was originally, I wanted to call it Lockdown with the Devil when I wrote it. For those who have read the Screw Tape Letters, it's a similar style to that.
Yeah.
It's basically fan fiction, like without actually being about it, but it's, I love C.S. Lewis. And, but I wrote it in July of 2020, and I thought, well, this lockdown thing might not last that much longer, so I don't want to associate it with that. And then after it became kind of like a World War II event where like everyone will remember the COVID thing forever, I changed the title back to Lockdown with the Devil because that's what I really wanted. And there's a feature in the book that's in there, kind of a little almost like a cameo, and it's basically based off myself.
Because you would be writing yourself as like the teacher that got canceled during all of that, essentially.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Yeah, we actually, on a different podcast I used to do, we reviewed your book, and I gave it quite a lot of glowing stars.
My buddy I saw that.
Yeah, my buddy who's Protestant wasn't as impressed, but I liked it a lot, and I'm Catholic, so.
Thank you.
Okay. Actually, what's funny, you say the Terror of Demons. I believe that's the one where in the opening, maybe chapter or two, you talk about video games being bad. Is that accurate?
I can't remember which chapter it was in, but I did talk about video games as something that might not be conducive to virtue, basically, yeah.
Yeah. I used to actually heavily disagree with you, but at the time I was running a gaming podcast, so didn't really fit the vibe. But the longer I actually really haven't played video games other than like socially with a few friends that have come over to my house in like 3 years. So I actually kind of agree with you, albeit a little different roundabout way. It just doesn't feel like it's done me any good. So
Well, video games are not intrinsically evil. It's almost, people use that term intrinsically evil. Almost nothing is actually intrinsically evil when you think about what that means philosophically.
right.
It'd be very hard to reach that bar. There's a few sins that could be there, but most are not. It's how you do it and why you do it, which makes the thing that's good or neutral into something bad. Shooting someone's a perfect example. If it's self-defense or if it's in combat, it's justified. If it's for murder, it's a sin, but it's not the actual bullet or the gun that makes the sin. And so video games are of course not intrinsically evil because there's nothing intrinsically sinful about pushing buttons and looking at pictures on a screen move around. But my contention against video games is basically just they're so
Addictive?
they're addictive, but not only the addictive part, because I think there are people, addiction kind of tends to be something of a personality thing, at least as far as I can tell. Some people just get hooked on things, some people don't. But it's also just the fact that out of all the time that we have to recreate, which is not as much as we should,
Right.
we should be doing things that do what recreate means, to recreate. And in video games, there are certain faculties that are engaged. For sure, there's decision making and there's hand-eye coordination, but there isn't as much imagination. The imagination is not really triggered very much because the images are provided. And whereas something like reading or just simply having conversations or listening to the radio or something like that, like an old radio drama, you actually have to make the pictures yourself. So there's a risk of our culture with being in front of screens all the time to have an atrophy in the imagination. And I just think that on top of that, video games themselves don't help the matter, if that makes sense.
They provide too much to give it's like if you had sometimes I've heard that glasses can like make your eyes kind of weaken over time.
Yes.
Where your imagination could be weakened by the images being provided to you. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Yeah. And also it's if they never went past like Super Nintendo, I don't think I'd have a problem with it, if that makes sense. Like I used to have a Nintendo as a kid, and they kind of, maybe even like probably N64 and PS1 probably is where it's really kind of started to get a little different. But if they never went past like the 2D borderline 3D stuff, it was really like it was a game in the true sense of a game. Like you were playing something, and there was some adventure and stuff like that, but if you lost, you maybe couldn't save it. And it certainly wasn't something that you could stay up all night drinking Mountain Dew to play, because it wasn't that type of thing. It just wasn't made for that. It was something that you could play with your dad, who like had never even used a computer, because it was 2 buttons and a couple arrows, and it was hilarious and fun. Like I used to love playing Super Mario on Super Nintendo. I loved that game. It was so much fun. Yoshi and all that. But then when they started going 3-dimensional, and they started adding a lot more buttons and the multiplayer and everything, it's kind of like, is it intrinsically evil to, I don't know, like, what's an analogy here? Like, is 12 shots of espresso with half a gallon of maple syrup in a cup intrinsically evil? It's like, no, but nobody should probably do that, because it's not really going to give you anything you need in the end, I guess.
That makes sense. Actually, it's funny, on Text Cathedra, I compared the original Super Mario Bros. To like a secular George and the Dragon.
Yeah.
Because it is really, you have a hero plumber who's saving a princess from a dragon. I mean, how much closer can you get?
I learned recently that we thought it was, this is what I heard, maybe I'm wrong, you would be the video game expert, but I always thought it was Mario speaking with an Italian accent, but it's actually him saying "Itsumi." I guess that means super in Japanese, Mario, and I always thought it was "It's a me," but there you go.
That is actually accurate. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you actually know that the original Legend of Zelda had a image in the manual of Zelda kneeling to the cross, or not Zelda, I'm sorry, Link kneeling to the cross
Yes, I did know that.
Literally the crucifix. Yeah. But then when it came to America, they're like, no, religion's a little too controversial. We got to remove that for the American.
Yeah, in Japan, they're like, this is great. It's Western culture. We'd like to honor your culture. And then it gets to America, they're like, screw our culture. You know,
it's too bad because it's like the Japanese will take an interest in something like that, but then in the American video game, it just destroys it. Like Americans need everything filtered.
It's funny when you're talking about Japan. I honestly think one of the reasons why the devil tried so hard to not let the Japanese be Catholic is because they would be like the best Catholics on earth. They're so disciplined and they're so conscientious, and like they've obviously got some moral problems because of all like there's no grace.
Yeah.
But like naturally speaking, they're insanely virtuous, like their dedication and their respect and their honor and stuff. It's like just change that impetus to suicide to like self-sacrifice, you know, like change that ancestor worship to the veneration of the saints. Like it would overlay so wonderfully.
Yeah, there was actually a pretty dedicated Catholic population before World War II, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the sites of the bombs. So like it's like the devil's working overtime to take out the Catholics in Japan.
Yeah.
Like just flat out. Like that, I believe that. I firmly believe he is. Because you're right. If you could evangelize Japan, you would have a very strong faith over there.
Yeah, well, that's what they were doing, and then they got kicked out for 200 years.
Yeah.
And then the shogun let them back in. And then they bombed their cathedrals, and now they are still there. There are about 1 million Catholics there.
Yeah,
and there's some traditionalists. There's one Japanese priest of the Society of St. Pius X, and he actually went to seminary when Lefebvre was there. He was old school, and I forget his last name. Anyway, I've watched some things from him, and he was a convert. I think he might have been a cradle Catholic, but I think he was a convert, and he just was like just getting very pious. And this is back in the early 80s. He was, like a young man, and I think it was Tokyo. I might be wrong on that, but he was just getting very pious and getting a real devotion to the Eucharist. And he was like, why are we taking it on the hand? Like he was just, his Catholic conscience was just, and his priest was French, from France. And he said, oh, you're just like that Lefebvre or whatever. And he was like, who's that? And then he went to the seminary.
That's funny. Yeah. That's actually a really great story about how you would get into something like that. Imagine that's great. Out of all your books, do you think the SSPX, The Defense, would be your favorite one, or which one would you be your favorite that you wrote? Because I've enjoyed all of the books that I've read of yours. Actually, the SSPX one is on my list that I haven't read it yet. I've read Charismania, the most recent one you just put out, the What Happened to Catholicism, the Lockdown with the Devil, even before the name change on Kindle, and then I think there's The Terror of Demons. So I've read all of those.
Well, thank you. You know what? Probably the one that I'm most proud of, I guess, in this sense, would probably be the most recent one. What Happened to Catholicism? I'm only 37, but at this side of the hill that I'm still on, that's probably my magnum opus to this point in my life. The SSPX book was, in another sense, really satisfying to write. But there was something about writing the modernism book where it was the hardest I've ever had to work on anything in my life, like as far as an intellectual pursuit. I've never done a PhD or anything like that. I've got too many kids to go back to school.
Same.
But it's 300 pages and it's like a zillion citations. I mean, if I was going to write a dissertation, that would be it, And so yeah, I hope that book stands the test of time, and because I really, really worked my tail off on it. So that's probably the answer, I guess.
Well, the only reason people would not pick up a book like that is if the premise of it eventually becomes not true. So maybe that would be a good thing if the sales eventually tank on that one.
Right. Like if we no longer have a crisis. But then I hope that it's like historical. Like, we should never, like reading about a book from the Aryan crisis. It's like, we should keep reading this book so we never do this again, Yeah.
Even though society is completely just ingrained with Gnosticism, especially with the Protestants. I mean, the amount of Gnosticism that has creeped into the culture is insane.
It is. Oh, you're talking about that with our mutual friend Elijah Yassi. I see him in the
Yeah.
chat.
Yep.
He,
Yeah, we did
he's
talk
so
about
funny.
that.
He says, "Dang, the guy on the left is destroying the guy on the right in this debate." What a funny guy.
Our right and left,
I don't know.
or his
And then he says,
right and left?
"Debate Jay Dyer."
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And I saw you guys talking about Gnosticism. Yeah. You know what? There's like 4 heresies. You know what I mean?
Yeah. They just keep creeping back in.
There's Gnosticism. There's an area. There's some sort of diminishment of the divinity of Christ in some way, and maybe it's Arianism, maybe it's adoptionism. It's something. There's always something like that. There's always a naturalism, and there's always a pantheism. You know, there's basically 4 of them, more or less, and they all just come in different forms. And Protestantism is certain brands of it have a Gnostic. I mean, the whole premise of it is kind of Gnostic. The fact that there's sort of an individual prophet who does have revelation from God that is the truth and everyone else is wrong and they're whatever, follow me. That's definitely Gnostic.
Well, I mean, like the Mormon church is literally like
Mormons are Gnostics, right?
Yeah.
You know, but they're very friendly. They're very wonderful
They are.
neighbors.
No, yeah, I don't mind living near them, but that, I mean, literally Joseph Smith is like a bonus Gnostic prophet.
Mormonism is American Islam.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's just more friendly.
It's like the prosperity gospel meets Muhammad.
Without the conversion by sword aspect.
Yes, and also with a touch of Scientology.
Scientology is the ultimate Gnosticism, just flat out. That is, I've gone on a few deep dives on that, and if you want to get into like serious conspiracy theories, like my goodness, Scientology is full of them.
I feel like Scientology was like made as a troll or something. You know,
have you ever looked into the guy that started
a little bit, Hubbard or whatever?
He was like dodging taxes from the government by owning a floating ship, and then just essentially employed people in his church who ended up paying him to work for him while they tended his ship in like international waters. Yeah. That was so he could stay out of like essentially tax evasion.
It's kind of respect. I kind of respect that guy in a way.
Yeah. And then he just makes up all of these like cosmic theories about the universe, and it's like, dude, what are you doing?
I mean, his theories are no more outlandish than like most of what's considered cosmology and evolutionary theory today. At least he just calls it a religion, doesn't pretend it's a research.
Yeah, and he didn't invent the flying spaghetti monster thing either.
Yeah.
So here's a question for you. I don't know if anybody's asked you this before, but where do you land on the aliens debate?
I mean, just technically speaking, I don't think it's possible there could be another race of man, you know, like what would constitute man. I have my suspicions, my hunches that it's probably demonic. I mean, it could be possible there could be other sorts of animal life forms on other places. I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know, is in some atmosphere somewhere, in some place, is there some sort of, type of insect or some, like, what would be an alien? Do you know what I mean? Like,
the idea that there could be another creature in God's image, I think is just flat out impossible.
I think that's impossible. But could there be a creature that's not in God's image? I mean, funny thing is, you know, one of the theories, and I'm a creationist, but one of the theories that some old Earth creationist types have clung to, which I think is a little weird, is I think they misread Scripture personally on Adam and Eve, because they say that God would never permit incest, but it's not really incest at the beginning. There's other reasons for that, but anyway, they believe that there was like a soulless race of man without the image and likeness of God, and that's what they procreated with.
Used the soul on them, essentially.
Yeah. Which is crazy to me, because it's I mean, it's not even. I understand that there are ways. Like, for example, I'm a young Earth guy, but I admit that you could look at day metaphorically, and there's nothing insane about saying that. There's not.
It's like what Daniel in the 70 weeks is not literally weeks.
There's many arguments that could be made that you're not like sinning against the faith because you think it's a different amount of time, because I mean, the beginning of the world is kind of a mystery anyway, you know. But then when you start hypothesizing things that aren't even in the Scriptures in an implicit sense, that gets weird.
So yeah, I have a similar thought process. I guess in my mind, I'm probably leaning more towards like the creationist aspect. I'm not 100% there, but I'm mostly there. Where I land is like, as long as people believe that God created all of it, I'm okay with them having a different beliefs, like mostly okay with them having a different thought process than myself. As long as they're not saying that it was like some random scientific event that happened sometime and just like saying a God didn't do it or something like that. Those people I have a hard time with, but everybody else, as long as you're saying God started everything, I don't think,
the issue
you know
I
what I mean?
have, yeah, I know what you mean, but the issue I have with a lot of the theistic evolutionists is that it's bad theology.
Oh, I don't believe in evolution.
Yeah.
I don't believe in that. I believe in, if anything, there's some sort of adaptation that occurs. Kind of like
Well, there's
what you said in your
100% an
book.
adaptation, 100%. I mean,
Yeah.
like that's
I
something
don't
we
think
can.
one species becomes another species. Does that make like that?
Yeah,
That's why I draw the line.
that's I think that's a philosophical heresy, and I use that in like the general sense of the term, not like a canonical thing, because that's like saying created things create themselves,
Yeah, no,
which is
no way.
absurd, But I mean, hey, look, I mean, Adam and Eve would have been, I imagine, the same race. I don't know,
Yeah.
probably because she came from him, and then we have the Tower of Babel, and people are dispersed throughout the earth, and now we have people with different skin colors and language groups and things like that. So there's clearly some sort of divergence of whatever in the genome, and we look different and stuff, and fine. And whether that was something God did kind of explicitly, or whether it was something that was part of the slow plan or something over thousands of years, I have no idea.
Right.
But yeah, there must be some sort of change happening at some point.
Agreed. Yeah. And that's where I land. It's like, so as long as somebody's like, okay, God created everything, that's the origin of, the universe that we know. Then I'm mostly okay. But yeah, like you said, I don't believe in evolution. Not in that way. We don't have like apes that become people. Like that's not a thing. Otherwise, why do we still have apes?
Well, if you watch Planet of the Apes, which I love that film series, actually, I thought I was going to hate it. I never watched it when it came out. Like I think the first one was 2011. I'm talking about the most recent.
Yeah.
And my sister-in-law, who has really good taste in movies, she told my wife, and she said, "Trust me, you guys are going to love this." And we watched it, and we binged them all in like 3 nights. And it was a stupid decision because it was like 4 hours of sleep, and we have all the little children. But it was so good, so I love those movies. But maybe that explains it.
Maybe. I suppose. Did you ever watch the Dune movies? Speaking of movies.
Nope.
Okay. I understand there's a little bit of more controversy with those, but Frank Herbert, I think, nailed the Muslim religion in that series of books, because you have like the warrior prophet who liberates the desert people, and it's literally like an anti-Islam book hidden behind a warrior messiah prophet.
I've heard good things about that series from Catholics. I was never a big fantasy reader. In fact, I'm not a huge. I've read like probably 10% of what I read of what I've read is fiction. I love to read it when I read it, but I just don't read it as often as I should.
So like Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, who all did you read?
C.S. Lewis is my favorite. His space trilogy is my favorite.
I love the space trilogy.
I absolutely adore it. I personally think C.S. Lewis is underrated amongst traditional Catholics for his philosophical acumen. I know that he was a Protestant, so the odd theological position is off. But I think he was an incredible sort of Neoplatonist, Boethian philosopher. And I really think that if people were to read his books like Miracles, I think his book Miracles, I think, is incredible. And I think having that kind of knowledge and acumen, trying to debate people in a materialist world, I think that he's underrated by Catholics. I think a lot of traditional Catholics kind of stay away because
he's a Protestant.
And also he's like the favorite of all of the sort of neoconservative stuff. But their favorite stuff is Mere Christianity. And Mere Christianity is fine. And like, I mean, the beginning of it's wrong because it talks about Christianity having like different doors and things like that. That's obviously indifferentist and that's wrong. But his explanations of the basic Christian concepts from a philosophical perspective are quite good. His arguments for the existence of God are exceptional. And when he talks about it from a moral perspective. But when you get into his deeper work, he was a profoundly intelligent man. And he was a huge medievalist. And so I love the space trilogy. I've read it through twice, and it's a lot, you know,
It is.
but I think it's amazing.
That was definitely one of my favorite books that we did on my other podcast, was going through those. And
Which is your favorite one of the series?
it's probably, I think most people would not choose the first one, but then it's hard to pick between the second two. Unless you like the first one, I would be interested to hear if that was your favorite.
No, it wasn't my favorite. I remember reading C.S. Lewis said his favorite book of the series was Paralandra.
I would agree with that. That is my favorite.
But he said his best book of the series was That Hideous Strength.
Yeah, I can see that, because there's more going on in That Hideous Strength.
Yeah,
and it's a better commentary on the world. But Paralandra is just such a poetic book.
Paralandra is almost meditative.
It is, yeah.
Like it's that book made me like I'm not like a guy with a science background, so it wasn't like I had a dog in the fight and I wasn't a huge evolutionist or something. But when I was kind of, you know, I was just a regular guy who wasn't a practicing Catholic and told evolution is the thing. And so when I was trying to figure out Catholicism as I was coming back to the church, I was trying to do the whole Trent Horn thing. I was trying to be smart, as you know, as smarty pants like all the rest of the neoconservative crowd, and it didn't make sense to me. But I was like, I don't know, they're really smart guys that talk at Steubenville and whatever. They all talk about how, you know, science and religion are like best friends. I'm like, okay, I got to try to figure it out. And then I read Paralandra. He basically talks about kind of like this young planet, and the way he explained it, I was like, evolution's so dumb. Like, this is the answer. That book basically made me a creationist.
Paralandra is like the ultimate getting into the mind of like what the devil would do to you if he had like full access to you all the time. Because one of the craziest things is when he like goes to sleep for the first time and he wakes up and the devil's still going after the pseudo Eve on the other planet. And I'm just like, man, like the devil never sleeps, you know, and he doesn't. He does, like, literally doesn't.
Yeah,
and
it's amazing.
It's so powerful. I think anybody who hasn't read Paralandra should at least try that one.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, That Hideous Strength. I love the towards the end scene. That's basically the Tower of Babel. All the scientists in the conference room.
Yes, exactly. And he has not to give spoilers for those who haven't read it, but the way that it ends with what's the main villain's name?
Shoot.
Yeah, that's on the tip of my tongue somewhere.
It's like something to do with like crumbs or something. It's like that kind of a name.
Yeah, but the way that he ends,
yeah,
it's almost comical, you know. Like, I mean, it's like, oh yes, like the folly, you know. It's almost like Greek mythology. It's like your own cult ends up being the way that you kill yourself, and it's like funny the way he's bouncing up and down, like because he's told to and stuff. It's just very strange.
Is it Wither? Is his name Wither? Something like that. Yeah, it's just a great book in general, and it's a better commentary on the world. But Paralandra is a better commentary on scripture, in my opinion.
It is, but you know what's terrifying in that book? Two things: the priest that's part of the crazy globalist group, is like the quintessential modernist, and he sounds like, you know, the majority of conciliar theologians in the most egregious sense. And then Philostrato, the Italian scientist.
Oh, yeah.
And he is obsessed with cleanliness and having to clean the earth. And he talks about the moon being shaved of its trees, and it's a clean planet. And I wrote an essay when I was working for LifeSite News. It was like a blog. And I talked about how C.S. Lewis gave us insight into the COVID stuff. And with the sanitizing everything. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And he talks about essentially we have to clean everything down to nothing. Yep.
Which is like really an end goal of science like that is showing science to the extremes.
It's also
science. Go ahead.
Well, it's also very Kabbalistic because it's like it's theology of the negation. You know, it's like reality is found in the nothing. You know, and it's like an annihilation of the human soul. It's very strange.
Yeah, eliminating everything. I mean, really, stewards of the earth is the exact antithesis to what they were trying to do. You know, being stewards of the earth, taking care of the forest will prevent them from burning down. But hey, let's just let everything pile up in California. It's all good, right?
I find it funny how C.S. Lewis and Tolkien were really good friends, but they also despised each other's methods of writing. Like Lewis loved allegory and thought, and Tolkien hated allegory and stuff. And it's like, both of you are amazing. Like, you guys are such curmudgeons.
Well, the best meme I've ever seen on that, it's like you got Tolkien and Lewis at the bar talking about their latest works, and C.S. Lewis is talking about something, and then Tolkien finishes him off by saying, "Okay, what about your Jesus lion?"
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just like,
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
do you know that Tolkien wrote, maybe whether it was consciously or not, he wrote C.S. Lewis into his books?
Who would he be in them?
Treebeard,
Really?
the reluctant warrior who leaves the battle before the end. Literally, in like the conversational, the way he talks, it's meant to be in representation of C.S. Lewis.
That's funny because C.S. Lewis wrote the main character of the trilogy was a philologist.
Yep. Yeah, Dr. Ransom literally is supposed to be Tolkien.
That's hilarious.
The protagonist, yeah. So you get Treebeard for C.S. Lewis, and you get Tolkien as Ransom.
Wow, that's cool.
Now, if you go back and reread Treebeard, you'll think differently about it.
Okay, I will. My boys are actually going through. My boys are going through the Lord of the Rings right now. They just finished The Hobbit.
Okay, yeah, The Hobbit's great, especially to start with. I love The Hobbit.
It's much easier for kids to understand,
Yeah.
and so they do read, but they're like 8 and 9 years old. So I don't know. Some 8 and 9-year-olds are reading Lord of the Rings. My kids are not, and it would just take them like 2 years to get through like half of one or whatever. So they'd probably get a lot better at reading if I made them do it. But anyway, we have the audiobook, so they have to at least listen to the whole audiobook, which I believe is reading. I know it's not the skill of reading, but I believe as far as like absorbing it, it's similar.
Spoken like a true audiobook recorder.
I am, but they have to listen to all the way through before they're allowed to watch the film.
That makes sense, yeah.
I don't think I'll let them watch the Lord of the Rings films yet, though, because they're a little darker than The Hobbit.
I saw that first Lord of the Rings at 8 years old. I'm 32, almost 33 years old. So when the Lord of the Rings came out, I was like 8 years old. That Boromir scene is ingrained in my brain.
Yeah.
I want to say I was like 8. I don't know. Maybe what year did the Lord of the Rings come out? Was it 01?
I was I'm 37, so I think it was when I was in grade 8 or 9, so it would have been 102, something like that. And I remember the third one came out because they were like 1 year after another, right? It was kind
I
of
was
like bang,
8 or
bang,
9, and I saw it in the theaters. And the Boromir scene was too much for me because you just arrow after arrow after arrow, and the
that'd be too much, especially in a theater where it's like right in your face. We don't even have a TV. Like we do have this 27-inch monitor that has a DVD player, but we don't have. But if they want to watch The Hobbit or something, it has to be on my laptop. So it's like a 13-inch MacBook. Yeah. So I don't know how effective the effects are on a screen that size, but a big screen would be terrifying.
Can I recommend a book series to you if you're interested in stuff for your kids?
Sure. Yeah. What's that?
Have you ever heard of the Wingfeather Saga?
I have not.
It's very good. It's written by, like C.S. Lewis, an Anglican, but at least allegedly I think he's Anglican, but it's very Christian based and it's very good.
Okay, I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, we live in the middle of nowhere, so we drive far for everything. So we're always also looking for audio stuff. If there's probably an audiobook of it. Angel Studios made it into a show or something.
The show is very good.
Okay.
I was initially disappointed because I thought they were adding stuff into it, and then I looked into it, and none of the additions in the show make any difference in the book because they're introducing characters that'll be important later on, so they can have the voice actors throughout the show. So it was odd, and then I realized why they did it, and I was like, oh, this is just fine. It's all good. It didn't change the actual story at all. So, and I believe the author is involved too. So, anyway, it's very good. I just finished reading it, I think sometime last year, just because I like to read through books before I give them to my kids. And that one was good. It was very good. They have dragons as the bad guys, so they'd be Michael D. O'Brien approved.
Yeah, I know, but I love the How to Train a Dragon movies.
Yeah.
I love them. I just think they're so fun, and I don't know. I know it's like the dragon thing, but I also think if you look back into the Middle Ages, like the idea of taming the dragon is also. Yeah. I think that's like the idea that I think you can portray, like obviously the devil can be a dragon, of course.
Sure.
But then also, like, we must believe that all of the creatures would have been under the dominion of Adam. So if we get right, with our virtue, then it should be the case that we should be able to tame the animals. I think that makes sense. Maybe.
I did have to laugh though when I was reading. I think it was either the Harry Potter and the Paganization of Culture, or it was the other one or the other. He talks about the movie Dragonheart and talks about how it's literally Gnosticism because it is. And I was like, oh man, that never clicked with me before. And my buddy and I were like the only two people I know that have watched that movie. And
I
we
don't
both
even know what that is.
it's the premise of the movie is there's this terrible prince who almost dies, and a dragon gives half his heart to the prince. And then in order to kill the prince in the future, they had to kill the dragon. So the dragon sacrifices himself. And then because all dragons, of course, end up in these stars, the dragon ends up as a star.
Oh, that is pretty Gnostic.
Yeah, it is very Gnostic. But that's the premise of the movie.
Yeah, that is pretty Gnostic. I never thought about that. Well, there you go. I guess I won't be going into that one.
Yeah, dragon. Nobody needs to watch Dragonheart.
What do you
CGI from the 80s?
Okay, what do you think about Harry Potter? Like, I never read them. I know what I'm supposed to think, because there's lots of theories about what's her name, the author, Rowland or whatever.
Oh, J.K. Rowling, yeah.
Right. There's theories that she was, kind of a witch or something like that. I don't know, but all that's obviously not provable. But my take for saying I'm not really going to get into it and just sort of stay away from it. Yes, the witchcraft stuff, it does seem like there's a possibility there. But for me, I thought the main problem with it, because I know the general storyline, I saw like one of the movies when I was 14 or something.
Sure.
But it was really just that it was consequentialist morally. Do you have other thoughts on it? Yeah.
Yeah. I would agree. Harry Potter is very in the gray. And that's where I have so many issues. I mean, Harry constantly betrays his friends just so that he can get a good outcome. And it doesn't push like high virtue. It's more like, okay, we have this bad guy. We have to do everything possible to take him down. And that's not really, that's not really how Christians view the world. Better, as well as I do, for sure. It may be better that that's not really how we view the world.
Well, that's kind of the opposite of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Lord of the Rings is virtue above the best option.
Yeah, like and sin itself is its own punishment in Lord of the Rings, which is a very Catholic mentality. It's like you punish yourself by even sinning, and you decay from the inside, and that's the whole ring motif and stuff. So I guess that is the opposite. So that my intuition was the same as yours, I guess.
Now the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, they're straight up like demonic possession in those movies. Just avoid them altogether.
Okay, I don't even know what those are, so I will be avoiding them.
It's the prequel to Harry Potter. I don't even think there's a book associated with it. There's just like, J.K. Rowling wrote some notes and they made a movie out of it.
She's like a billionaire, eh?
Yeah, she is. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how you couldn't be with that much money. And
that's good.
Yeah, you like that?
Yeah.
Just rolled right off the tongue. The other thing I was going to ask you about though is music. So I know that you liked Enoch's The Passion. Do you listen to other Catholic music like that, or is he like kind of the sole outlet for that kind of stuff?
So Enoch is a personal friend, and I support him in his endeavors. I personally don't listen to rap anymore.
Oh, okay.
I think he's very talented, and I think he's an incredible lyricist, and I think he's he's a very good man. And I know that a lot of people benefit from his work, and they enjoy it. And but I just personally, I don't even listen to music that often. I listened to a ton of rap growing up. Like I was, I don't know. I just listened to a ton of. I listened to a ton of rap growing up, and I had a lot of like, how do I say this politically correctly? I had a lot of black friends, and and especially when I was in university, I was a fullback for the Ottawa Sooners, which was like the Canadian junior football team for that city, and so I was the fullback. And there was 6 or 7 of us in the running back group, and they were all black, most of them from the islands. In Canada, the black population is very different. They're all immigrants. Yeah. There is a colonial population out in Nova Scotia, but they've been here the whole time, and it's not like the States where they have different accents and things like that. They're just like most black guys in Canada are just from West Africa or from Jamaica or Barbados or something. And so all my buddies were these island guys, and our coach was from St. Lucia. And I remember chuckling to myself one day. It's like, of course I'm the fullback because all these guys are way more athletic than me, and they're actually going to run the ball. And here I am just going to make a hole for them. So I listened to tons of rap, and Initially, when I was younger, I would listen to mostly like what you would call conscious rap. I didn't like the sort of really party stuff or whatever. I listened to like Jurassic 5. I'm trying to think of the bands I listened to. It was stuff where they had tried to have something to say, and I would probably cringe at some of it now. Maybe it was like, I don't know, a lot of these guys were in like the Nation of Islam or something. But I enjoyed it. And then as I got a little older, I got more into some of the mainstream stuff. But then I just got soured on it when I had my conversion. I tried the Christian rap thing for a while, and then I just stopped altogether. I don't know. I took a long time off listening to music in total, and then I just stopped. Now I will say, if I'm ever in the mode where like I'm driving a long way, it's late at night, and I just can't drink any more coffee, that kind of thing, and I know that something will jack me up so I don't get in a car accident, I'll probably throw on Sabaton.
Oh, Sabaton's great.
Yeah.
I that's one of my, like, if I need to get pumped up, that is a great song.
I
You're
use
talking about
it
The Last
wisely.
Stand, right?
Well,
The
just
Last
yeah, I
Stand.
love a lot, yeah, all those stuff, but I use it wisely.
Yeah,
And or I'll listen to military bagpipe marching tunes and basically fantasize about playing rugby again and get home safely.
yeah. My kids laugh because when I mow the grass, I'll sometimes just put on literally the Miserere and just listen to that on repeat, because it puts you in the headspace to just kind of enjoy leisurely activities like mowing the grass.
Yeah.
But the other question I had for you, actually, maybe not a question, more of a commentary. You did that article about how the native Canadians were not actually in mass graves in Canada.
Mm.
So the funny thing about that is I actually have like the native Canadian ancestry.
Do you?
And so like when I found
I could tell when
out
I saw
about
you.
that,
I could tell when I saw you.
like one of my ancestors married into like the Navarre family. So
Okay.
like I'm not a Navarre, but I have Navarre ancestry. So like French Canadian and like, you know, the native Canadians kind of intermingled a lot. And I found that in my backdrop. And when I read that article, I was like, oh, thank God the Catholics didn't actually do what Trudeau is suggesting, because that would be horrible. And I'm glad that that's not the case.
Oh, they didn't do it at all.
That's what I'm saying. I'm glad that that did not happen. Like, it's just such a, I wouldn't say at the time I was like really distrusting of the official narratives of things, but when I saw your article, I just immediately like flipped a switch in my brain. I stopped kind of accepting just straight up media narratives with that kind of stuff.
It's not. It's the thing about the thing about it is it's such an egregious lie that it's like impossible to pick apart in the public eye, because it's like the old expression of, you know, you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
Because the thing is about it, the lie worked.
Yeah.
Because the church, sadly,
Apologize.
already is apologizing for its own history.
Sadly, yeah.
You know, and like the church has woke problems. It has DEI problems. It has all these stupid problems that have been happening since, you know, the 50s and 60s, especially. And so all it would take would be the bishops to stand up and say, no, I have all the, like, because they have the records. This is the thing that's crazy. I did this, maybe you saw it, but I did a show with a historian, and the government of Canada digitized all the records from all the schools. They're free. You can just go read them. And he did all the reading, and we read them. We read all the stats and all these things on air. And then as far as the actual like relationship with the students, all these like archives, they have them all. They could just read them and they could just show us. We have books and things like that from, like, we have
Didn't
the diaries.
you play a TV cast of them going through the school in that video? Okay,
Yeah.
I did see that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was in the night. It was on the CBC. It's like Canada's PBS. And like they had a documentary in the 60s about how great the schools were. And like, you know, now everyone just hates the church so much now, and they just hate history so much, and they just hate Europe so much that they say, well, that must have all been propaganda. But like the residential school program was, residential is just another word for boarding school, so it's interchangeable. The residential school program was modeled off of the European education systems. A bunch of Canadian lawmakers around the 1880s or so, took some time in Europe and looked at how they educated because they wanted to bring the education level up in Canada because that's public education was skyrocketing all over the sort of develop-ish world. And so they came back with the plan. And the legislation in Canada was that every kid was required to go to school unless he had an exemption. And the exemptions were things like farming or distance. Okay. That would make it impossible. So they said, well, what if we made schools for people that live in places where it's impossible? And many of the native populations live in very remote areas, and they always have.
Right.
Many of them do not. So, for example, that school in that video that was part of my podcast, that school is the one in Kamloops, BC, where the alleged mass grave is from.
Yeah.
Which there isn't. It doesn't exist. And it's like in the town. So it was a school at the town, and kids would come in from far away for a free education by priests and nuns, which is like the best education you can get. And it was like in public. It wasn't like some secret. Like they were walking around the city. It was like they're right there, you know? And the funny thing is, if you go through all the records and stuff, they had lower, like these native kids had lower records of tuberculosis and Spanish flu deaths than everybody else because they had a hospital where they lived with doctors that were employed 24/7. And then every time a kid died, there had to be a 3-fold inquiry. So you had to have the doctor with records on all the medications and all the treatments, like under oath. And you had to have the principal or headmaster, and then you had to have a nonpartisan official come in and do his own investigation. They didn't investigate who died from COVID that well. You know,
I know. No, they did not.
So
at
like,
all.
it's not even possible that it's true, but nonetheless, people are stupid. So there you go.
That's the common denominator is people tend to be stupid.
Yeah.
Sadly.
And woke.
Hey, here's something I brought this up with Joey Olivo. I don't know if you know him or not.
Yeah, he's Taylor's buddy.
Yeah. And there was something that clicked with me the other day. We were singing the Agnus Dei, and I was like, well, woke has their own version of Dei. It's DEI.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and like
yeah.
that is literally an attack on the Latin Dei.
Could be. Yeah,
I think it is. I think all of this stuff is purposeful. It's meant to do these things. Like, so now everybody associates the 3 letters DEI with diversity, equity, inclusion instead of what the Latin means.
I never thought of that. Now I don't like DEI. Good job.
You didn't like it before, but that's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But I do think there's a lot of like Latin. Okay, here's a question for you. You'll appreciate this one. The science community with Latin, I almost feel like they co-opted Latin in order to weaken the church's hold on the Latin language. And that's how you end up with classical Latin versus liturgical Latin.
I think it's just because until about 70 years ago, pretty much anyone with an education would have known Latin terms.
You think that's why more so than, okay.
They're precise.
That's true.
Like it's the particular grouping. And Latin has particular declensions that make it easy to do those sorts of things.
I do have another thing. This is funny. This stuff just keeps coming back to my brain from previous things you've done. The Father Hess commentary. How did you even stumble on that? Like, did
on
you
his
know
commentary?
About it? Yeah, like on the Novus Ordo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
YouTube. So 2018, I discovered Father Hess. One of the best things ever happened to me in my life. And I was when I was still a teacher, and YouTube algorithm, I guess. I don't even know, because I think it's because I was searching SSPX stuff.
Does he come up a lot in SSPX searches? Because he's not SSPX, right?
No, but he was like best friends with Father Schmidberger, who was the general superior and who is the superior of Germany. And Father Hess narrated the German translations of many of Archbishop Lefebvre's conferences
That's interesting.
That would be played during lunch, because like in the seminary they get read at lunch, where they would play on the tapes. This is back in like the 90s. Mm-hmm. They would play these tapes of Father Hess reading Archbishop Lefebvre's conferences in the seminary at lunchtime for their meditative reading while they were eating. And so he was very close. Father Hess's background, though, he was he's a genius in the sense of like people, objectively speaking, have insanely well working brains.
Yeah.
As much as I dislike him, like a Ben Shapiro is like that. It's like his
Yeah.
instant memory recall is exceptional, you know, and that's just a gift that people have. And Father Hess was one of these, happened to be Catholic, which was good.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so he has one of those like photographic memories or something. So he just cites things after, and you know, and he's also very logical. So he was just a priest, like he was just an Austrian. I think he was from a noble family. There was some sort of royalty in his family lineage, which I think was one of the reasons he was able to sort of go off and just be a traveling lecturer that didn't have to be paid to do it. Because I think he was actually independently wealthy. But
That'd be nice.
yeah, yeah. Well, don't you know, all these traditional Catholic podcasters, we do this for the money, and so there you go. And but he was like a scholar, like he was a highly accomplished, theologian in Rome, doing all the degrees and all these kinds of things. And he was working for Cardinal Stickler. He was his secretary, and Cardinal Stickler was actually pretty traditionally minded. And he just kind of had his own conversion to tradition, like that he grew up with, and just realized the whole NO experiment just wasn't for him. And so he was not attached to a parish. He wasn't attached to a diocese. He wasn't in a religious order. So it was kind of like he just kind of resigned and just went around lecturing and writing and things like that. And it was interesting because like he was never like suspended or anything, so he was this like thorn in people's side because he could just kind of show up and say things like a normal priest, but he like loved the SSPX, and he was extremely intelligent, and he was instrumental for me in I never had any intuition or instinct towards sedevacantism. It's just not something that I ever really like had a pull towards. But as I'm reading all this different theories about stuff, I'm like, well, I should probably see what this one's about, because who the heck knows? Things are nuts. And hearing him talk about it and go over the errors of the popes from long before the council at various times in the papacy was really illuminating, and that just was enough for me.
I think God can have imperfect leaders at the head of his church and his people. I don't think that's outside of the realm of possibility. And that alone tells me that sedevacantism just doesn't seem accurate to me.
I'm starting to get very soured on sedevacantism. Like, again, I never was a sede, but there are some pretty intelligent sedes out there that are very nice men. So
I'm not saying they're bad people necessarily, but I think they're wrong.
Well, I don't just
and
think,
I'm not going to argue with them either.
I know. Yeah. Well, I've come to realize that, and this is just a general sense. Obviously, there's always exceptions, but I've come to I can't even try to have conversations anymore with any of these guys online. Like, I get the same criticisms and insults and proof texts and, you're a heretic. I get the same thing from these Sede guys that I get from the diehard Novus Ordo guys. Like, they have the same beliefs. They just have a difference of belief about fact. Like, the Sede guys believe that, like, basically the Pope, they basically inflate this notion of papal infallibility beyond anything the church even defines, and then say, well, because there's errors, therefore it's not the Pope. Whereas the Novus Ordo guys say, haha, you're wrong. This is why it's not an error. And I'm like, both of you are nuts. Like recently I did this video on
Kennedy, you just got a Vatican II harder.
Of course. It's like voting. And communism. It'll be done well eventually. But I just did this video on the canonization infallibility question. And it's very clear that it's not defined as a dogma that you must accept canonizations are infallible. And there just happens to be very strong discussion between various theologians, even today. And I am called a heretic, and like it's a mortal sin, both by that classical theist guy who's like the Zoomer semi-trad God king out there for people on the internet. And then I get it from the Sedes, and they're both like just literally they're just doing screenshots of the same stuff. And I'm like, both of you guys are the same, but you hate each other. You guys are the match made in heaven. But so I'm just kind of done with these guys. They're, they're just too annoying.
Yeah, I don't know many diehard Novus Ordos and Novus Ordo lovers, I would say, people that really love the Novus Ordo. But I do know that some of the boomers are attached to aspects of the Novus Ordo. Like, they love their guitar, they love their, happy-go-lucky music. And it's very difficult to get a parish where the boomers have the biggest sway to stop doing those things.
I have more respect for the boomers that actually love the thing itself than for the people that defend it but hate it. Like
Yeah.
the young guys, there's a problem out there. Like you're 33. Do you count as a millennial?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Yep. I'm
Okay,
not a Zoomer.
thank goodness. I'm just kidding.
You're like no Zoomer cast for me.
I really like Nick Cavazos. He's a good man, but he's wise beyond his years, which is why he seems older than he is. But there's a real problem right now with a lot of these young Zoomer guys. And one of them is going to clip me saying this and put it on Twitter tomorrow. And then all of them are going to be tweeting at me from their mom's basements in between playing Call of Duty. And is that still, I don't know if that's still a game, but if that's a thing.
It is. It
okay,
is.
Good.
I believe that they still have like some kind of a battle royale with it going on.
Okay, good. Some things never changed. It was the thing when I was a kid, and now it still is. So, but there's a problem with a lot of these guys in the way that they interact in their apologetics and stuff. The thing is, like, they don't have any wisdom because they're too young. It's not their fault. Like, you can't actually be smart when you're 25 years old. Like, maybe, like, the only exceptions are, like, even traditional priests. Like, I've known traditional priests who come wet behind the ears from seminary because they, like, especially if they're from Europe, they only have to go to seminary for 6 years because they have philosophy education in high school in most European curriculums. They don't have to do that first philosophical year. So they're, 24 when they're ordained, or 25. And, they've been at least put through the ringer in a very intense seminary. They're usually sent to Africa and like knocked down a peg and, in their apostolate years and stuff. But even they grow immensely over the next like 3 or 4 or 5 years. They become a man, and, but these young guys out there like doing apologetics and like defending things that they think they need to defend. And I'm like, these guys, they're not actually theologians. And I'm not a theologian. I'm just saying I'm admitting that, but they're not theologians. And a lot of the stuff that people people are conflating apologetics with theology. Apologetics they're different things. And when you get into the weeds in theology and you're not a theologian, you're either going to get yourself destroyed and smacked down, or you're going to lead people severely astray. Like, apologetics is explaining the things to defend the Catholic faith against attacks against the Catholic faith. Theology is explaining the ins and outs of why we believe what we believe. And the thing is, tons of what we believe isn't defined. And I don't think a lot of these guys even really understand the levels of dogma to the degree that they should before they even talk about stuff. And another thing that's difficult, I think, and I feel bad for these guys because I'm glad that I didn't have a mouthpiece when I was 24 years old, because I would be ashamed at myself. But they're not married, most of them. They don't have any children. They don't have any life experience. It's just the way it is, and you can't get it till you get it. They're not officially trained as theologians in seminaries or something like that. And because they have these big influencer backgrounds and they know how to do the whole TikTok Zoomer thing, a lot of places like are pumping them up as basically influencers. But a lot of these guys are going to crash and burn out of the faith. It's going to happen to many of them because they're picking fights with people that are way above their heads. And 10, 15 years from now, these guys are going to be trying to be taken seriously, and they're no longer going to be the hotshot, good-looking little 25-year-old kid. And it's like, now you're just going to have to stand on your own 2 feet as a grown-up man who's intelligent, not as some guy who has the like social media ways behind you and are quick on your feet, because that's going to go away because there's going to be another kid who's going to come through. Yeah. And I just don't think they realize what they're getting themselves into.
That's why I chose to go this route, where I'm just trying to have interesting conversations that may help somebody or may not. I don't know, whatever. That from a Catholic perspective, I'm not trying to be a theologian, or maybe somewhat of an apologist for certain things, but not to the degree that these influencers are going for. I'm not one of those guys. Like, I fight really hard for Genesis 3:15 being "She shall crush thy head." I've got a lot of evidence to support it too.
That's a good hill to die on. That's a good hill.
I will die on that hill. I'm assuming you're on the same spot with me on that one. Yeah. So I have asked most of my guests that have any inkling of an idea of what the argument is, whether or not that's something that they believe too.
Because it says ipsa, right? Isn't that the idea? Yeah, exactly.
Well, and then people will go back to the Greek and they'll say like, oh, the Greek says this and the Hebrew says that. And then somebody tried telling me the Dead Sea Scrolls had it as he, and I was like, really? So I found, the selection of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and wouldn't you know it, it's missing from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So you can't even defend that it's he from the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Also, isn't it in like the Hebrew isn't it like neutral?
It is a neutral verb.
That's right.
There's actually a logic to that. not neutral verb. I'm sorry, neutral pronoun.
Yep.
And the logic is, if you read Philo, who is a Jewish philosopher at the time of Jesus, he basically says that logic is male and that emotion is female. So if you're trying to describe the logic of a woman, you would use an androgynous or male verb or male pronoun to describe it. So like the logic of Mary accepting the fiat would be she. Oops. About flipped my phone off the table.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
you're right.
That's the essential way that I look at it. So for me, it's like it's very obvious, and then I will post she shall crush the head, and I get a bunch of people going, no, it's he. Okay, whatever. You're obviously not going to listen to me, so why would I explain it to you? You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I think Josephus even says the same thing, but I think he's got some footnotes and explanations why. I'd have to go back and reread. I read most of the Josephus writings because I'm trying.
Oh, really?
I'm trying to write a book. You've inspired me to write a book. I'm trying to write one. So
on what?
Have you ever heard of Tertius?
Maybe. Sounds familiar. Not sure though.
He's in the. He writes his name into the letter to the Romans because St. Paul wants him to. He essentially writes it down for him. So I'm writing a 3. Well, maybe 3. We'll see how far I get with it. But I'm writing a book about him.
Okay.
Historical fiction. Yeah. Kind of. I was inspired by some of your writing and some of Taylor Marshall's writing.
His Sword and Serpent trilogy is actually really good.
It is. And your narration, I'm glad you said audiobooks count because your narration is phenomenal.
Well, audiobooks have to, thank you, but audiobooks have to count because that's how most people read back in the day.
Yeah.
People would read to them.
What is it called? The not the town crier, the orator. That was like
and I mean they read the scriptures at mass.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So
before you had missals in the pews, people were just listening to the priest or the outdoor sermons that would happen sometimes. Like I think isn't Augustine famous for doing tons of outdoor sermons?
Well, I know before he was a Catholic, he was one of those like public orators who'd be the voice of the emperor.
Right. Yeah. And that was how you would get paid for that kind of a job. You'd be the most interesting person in the public square, right?
Mm-hmm. Celebrity.
Before like the modern celebrity was a thing, yeah.
Augustine is kind of like if a Jordan Peterson became a bishop.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
That's well, yeah. I've read recently in the last year, I finally read his Confessions.
It's amazing.
It is, but then the whole like 3 chapters on time, I'm like, really?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do we need to spend so much time on time?
So good, and it's so insane and so hard to understand. And the way this is the thing that I love about Augustine, and this is why I hate when some of the like neocons will use him to prove why you don't have to be a creationist because he had a bad translation, and because there wasn't the Vulgate finalized yet, and he admittedly couldn't read Greek. And so he read the Vetus Itala, or the old Latin one. And there was a couple.
Isn't it the Vetus Latina?
There's 2 names for it.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, he read that, and there was a couple discrepancies in there that were cleaned up. And funny enough, and so he believed that it was not 6 literal days. And then because he believed it happened all at once.
Yeah, it was instantaneous.
And I'm like, well, that's not going to help your argument for evolution. Like 6 days is old Earth for.
Let me snap
Augustine.
My fingers.
Yeah.
And, oh, look, it's all here.
But then he spends an entire book in the Confessions, like they're called books. There's like 13 chapters, but they're books or whatever. And he spends an entire book of that book talking about the first like 4 words of Genesis, like in the beginning God created or whatever. And he's like philosophizing about what it means to do something in the beginning when there is no time. And it just blows your mind. And I'm like, this is hilarious. He had a bad translation and he still explained creation in a philosophically perfect way. And he didn't even have the right book to go off of. And he talks about if there's any ever, he said to himself, if there's anything, this is in his, he wrote a book called The Literal Interpretation of Genesis, which for some reason the evolution guys have never read, because in it he says, shocker, this is literal interpretation of Genesis. And it's in the title. And he says, if there's ever anything in there that I cannot understand, he says it's either a text error, because he knows that there were translations.
Right.
He said, or it is basically my stupidity. And he said if anything ever seems to contradict in like natural truths what is firmly revealed in Scripture, he says we must be wrong on the natural truth. Complete
Yeah.
opposite mentality of scholars today.
I find his writing very, even though it's like what, you're in Africa in like the 400s or something.
Yeah.
It's so relatable even to today because he doesn't spend time with the contextualizing. He's more into the philosophy, and it's very good philosophy.
He was an incredible philosopher. He was, and the funny thing is, he was a Neoplatonist.
Yeah.
And there's an unfortunate trend, even in traditionalism. There's an unfortunate trend of this hypothesis that basically Thomas Aquinas comes along and finally gives us Aristotle, and all of a sudden we can finally do like precise theology or something. And it's so stupid because Aristotle was trained by Plato.
Yep.
And Augustine was a Platonist. And the person that Aquinas cites the most besides the Scriptures is Augustine. So like Thomas was an Augustinian. And if you actually read, in a sense, and he wasn't a Thomist because he didn't have his own school that he named after himself, and if you read the really good Dominicans like Venerable Louis of Granada, they love Augustine. Like they read Augustine like crazy, and the first millennium of the church was very much Augustinian and very Platonic. And it's completely compatible with Aristotelianism. There's obviously huge benefits to Aristotelianism, but it wasn't like all of a sudden a switch flips and now we have precise scholastic theology. And what also is annoying is that in the Orthodox churches, for about 200 to 300 years, they were Thomists.
Yeah, they really liked Thomas Aquinas.
That's why when they got to Florence, they could use the same terms. And now a lot of these stupid Orthodox apologists, they hate Thomas and they hate Augustine.
Which makes no sense.
And they don't even realize their own history, that like your guys were Thomists. And the funny thing is, one of their Thomists, a major Orthodox theologian, the only two places he disagreed with Thomas was on Thomas's explanation of the papacy, obviously. Yeah. And he believed in the Immaculate Conception where Thomas didn't. So it's just, even their Thomists were more Catholic than some of the things that would be later clarified with Thomas's writings.
Yeah, it is funny. Have you read Irenaeus?
Yeah, selections, but not the whole Against the Heresies.
He is one of the most sarcastic destroyers of Gnosticism that exists. There's like a whole part where he talks about and the waters, according to the Gnostics, the salt water comes from the tears. And then he says like from the sweat, and then the fresh water comes from the tears. And he goes, and where do these geysers come from, this hot water? Because if you got the tears and the sweat, where else can you get liquid from this woman goddess? I was like, oh boy, what are you trying to say here, Irenaeus?
We are way too soft nowadays, and we need to recapture a little bit of that fire. It's not fire and brimstone in like the sense we think of like some Baptist preacher, but in the sense of just say it like it is. And if something is stupid, call it stupid. Like earlier, I had this interaction with this guy on X, and Twitter is so stupid. I should probably get off of it, but whatever. And he said something, and I replied like a person who can like read. And all he did was reply with some GIF and like call me grandma or something. And I wanted to just reply, and I wanted to say, oh my goodness, you're so stupid, because he's so stupid. And like, it's not an insult. It's like, oh my goodness, I didn't know that.
You're actually not very smart.
And there's a recent article at Crisis, a guy wrote about how Christ called people morons. And that's true. So like the word foolish is like a synonym for moron, but in Greek, it's like moros or something. Like it's literally translated as moron. He's like, we need to recapture this. And I'm like, amen to that.
And flip tables of the money exchangers and the various, I mean, really, like people always talk about Jesus being like peaceful and obviously the guy radiated peace. Jesus Christ literally radiates peace, but he's not going to apologize for being correct, and he was always correct. So when like you have the people doing the money exchanging in the temple, his father's house, he flips the tables. Like, he's not afraid to do anything. So, like,
Yeah.
on that same note, if he wanted female priests, he would have had a female apostle. You know, like, there's no reason why Jesus Christ would have been afraid to have a female apostle.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting? In my research on the canonization infallibility question, according to Ratzinger, John Paul II did not affirm primarily, as with primary infallibility, that women can't be priests.
Really?
Yeah, it's part of the third. What do they call it? There's like three levels of infallibility, which I know sounds so strange because it's like, isn't it just infallible? But it means like, is it infallible because it is directly from revelation? Is it infallible because it's indirectly from revelation, but necessary for it and part of the faith, you know, in the traditional sense? That would be like the Immaculate Conception.
Right.
Or is it infallible insofar as, I don't even know how to explain it because I'm not that smart. But women priesting is the third part is the third aspect for according to Ratzinger, and so is euthanasia, about the permissibility of it.
Really?
Yeah. So this is again why my warning to a lot of these like Zoomer guys is that they need to know, like, when they're going to be talking about all these sorts of things, they don't realize that this whole paradigm that they're defending, this whole post-conciliar paradigm, is the reason why you have cardinals and the guy who's in charge of the guy who's in charge of the JP2 Institute in Rome now, the Family Life or whatever, where he debates whether or not it could be possible for there to be euthanasia. There's a reason why he hasn't been censured. You can actually find that reasoning in Ratzinger, which just blows people's minds. But so it's like there's, again, back to the idea that the waters are very deep when you get into the theology stuff, and they need to know what they're doing, because there's a lot of surprises there.
All right. I know that we're getting close to the cutoff time here. I want to ask you one more question.
Sure.
What was the most interesting thing that did not make your book on modernism?
Well, my book Charismania started as a chapter in that book.
Oh yeah, I think I remember you saying that in one of your podcasts. Yeah.
So I took it out. Also, I left out various things about Ratzinger and John Paul II because the nature of the book being something, it's by Sophia, it's kind of like mainstream as I'm going to get. Eric Sammons, the editor, really helped me a lot, and we sort of made decisions in conjunction, like, if you're going to be going after these sacred cows, so to speak, meaning pointing out some of the major problems, try to do it in a way where you don't not make the point, but make the point in a way where someone can actually receive it. And it's a fine line, because it's like there's a fine line between not telling the truth or trying to tell the truth in a way that someone can actually hear it.
Yeah. So
I hope I balanced it. But there were certain things I could have, like John Paul II believes that, and this is in writing, as is in his writings. It's not like I'm making this up. It's not from, like, you know, Radtrad, Taylor Marshall, schismbblog.com, and which is not
that Taylor Marshall would be a schism blog.
No, but, like, you know what I mean? It's not from some stereotypical Radtrad source. And John Paul II believes that Protestants and Orthodox are in the communion of saints. Like, he talks about our common communion of saints. And so did Ratzinger. And I'm like, this is insane. Like, he believes, and they literally speak in terms of, there are things that divide us on earth, but we share this common communion of saints. So when people will say, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they had the statue of Martin Luther in 2017 in the Vatican, I'm like, they're just following John Paul II, which is very hard for people to hear. It's one of those things where they almost get offended because, like, how dare you? And I'm like, it's his words. And so I left certain things like that out where I could just kind of make my point without necessarily trying to rub it in or put salt in the wound.
Right. And if anything, you could argue that there was probably a poor catechesis at some point in the church between Vatican II and now that led to some of these errors and issues.
Yes, and I do give Ratzinger and John Paul II a huge benefit of the doubt, and I mean it. I don't just do it just to be nice.
Right.
But Ratzinger came of age under National Socialism. Not that he was a Nazi, but he came of age under that, and that was state-run education. Lots of ecclesial things were censored. It was very materialistic, and the modern philosophy was shoved down their throat. That's what happened. And that wasn't his fault. That's what happened to him. He lived through a terrible, terrible war. He lived through, the terrible fallout of communism and the depression and all this. Like, he lived through that. And so that, and he saw that all of the resources in the world and the entire thrust towards progress was seen as something, as a materialist scientific enterprise that would alleviate the sufferings of the world. And that was what he was fed as a youth.
Yep.
And John Paul II, who was even older, he lived through the unbelievable, brutal carnage of what it was like to live in a communist society. And he was educated by Marxists and so on and so forth. And so they never received a proper philosophical education. And they both admit to it, People will say, oh, John Paul II, he studied Thomas under Garrigou-Lagrange and he passed his courses. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, Father James Martin, like, probably read St. Ignatius, you know what I mean? And did the retreat or did the Ignatian exercises. But it's like, he's also bad. So, I mean, a lot of Martin Luther was an Augustinian, and that sometimes that just happens. But yes, I gave them a huge benefit of the doubt because of the historical context.
Yeah, and I do think some of those things would have made more headlines if they were living during if they were the Pope during the Francis papacy. Can you imagine how much under the microscope stuff you would find out?
People have people think, and you read the book, right? You read the Modernism book?
I read it. Yep.
I mean, the synodality stuff, the stuff that JP2 said about like synods being the way to find the dynamic interpretation of Vatican II. And I was like laughing as I'm writing this book because I'm like, oh my goodness. He says Archbishop Lefebvre is a schismatic because he doesn't understand something from Vatican II. And then he also says in another document at a different time that they'll finally figure out what Vatican II means if they have more synods. And I'm like, oh my, you're excommunicated and a schismatic because you don't believe in the thing you don't even know yet.
Yeah, the whole time I was listening and reading your books, I did a combination of audiobook and reading. I just kept thinking of relativism because relativism is hardcore modernism.
Relativism is one of the necessary. I mean, it's agnosticism. Like that's, Pius X would have called it agnosticism. It's one of the tenets of modernism. And what's interesting is Ratzinger, who did have many good qualities, but also had many modernist sympathies, and he did change as he got older. I believe that. I do too. He says he didn't, but I read his works and I'm like, well, you're not the same guy here as you were there, so I don't know what to tell you. And he was hardcore against relativism, but then when you read about him trying to like establish the truth, I'm like, you're still trying to establish the truth, like in a very Hegelian sense, which I think is kind of cutting the branch you're standing on. But I don't know. Yeah,
it was a very interesting book. I would definitely recommend anybody who's interested in learning about what happened to the Catholic Church and Catholicism in general, go read, at least give Kennedy Hall's book a try and see what you think.
Well, thank you.
I'll drop a link to your channel and the book in the pinned comment for this video. So people will be able to find it.
I appreciate that.
So anyway, and keep writing because I'll keep reading and maybe we'll get you on again in the future.
Thank you. I just started writing a new book today, so I won't tell anybody what it is, but prayers. It shouldn't take me too long. It's a shorter one.
Sounds great. And many of my friends have read Charismania, so that one definitely it's doing work. We'll put it that way.
Good.
So thank you for coming on. I know time's a little tight at this point, so we're going to call it here. But I would love to get you on again in the future. And if you have any parting words you'd like to say, go ahead.
Well, if anyone's listening and in the next 27 days wants to decide whether or not they'd like to go with me to the Holy Land, registration ends for our Holy Land pilgrimage at the end of the month. And Father Asher of the SSPX is our chaplain. And I have no idea if we can even do this, but maybe we can knock on Cardinal Pizza Ball's door and see if he'll give us a high five or something. I don't know. But besides that, we're going to go to all the amazing places in the Holy Land and, walk in the footsteps of Christ. So there's about 25 of us so far on the trip. So there's a few spots left.
Somebody's got to pack a pizza box full of Papa John's for him.
Don't insult the man. He's actually, he knows real pizza. Yeah.
I know. I'm joking. All right. On that note, though, thank you very much. I'm going to hit the end stream button and we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.
Thank you.